A young lady, responding to a picture of Mary and Joseph on the Little White Chapel Facebook page, wrote, "Mary and Joseph were not refugees. They were not immigrants. They were simply travelers who had to go to Joseph's hometown because of the census."
Thank you.
Her not completely informed remarks got various responders. Some people just wrote, "Ha!" Others put avatar emojis of themselves as responses to her, with their eyes rolled up to the heavens saying, "Help her, Lord." I wrote back to her explaining that when Jesus was a small child, Mary and Joseph took at least 3 trips. Yes, one to Bethlehem because of the census, but because of dreams, they took at least 2 more. Joseph had already received one dream, saying that God wanted him to keep his vow to Mary and raise the Christ child as his own. And now this second dream, what a nightmare. Joseph was just getting used to Mary's son himself, and now King Herod wanted to kill Mary's son, the promised Messiah. In the dream, the angel warned, "Get up, get out, flee in the dead of night." Can you imagine getting a little baby up in the dead of night, taking what possessions you could carry, traveling down the familiar streets you had known all your life, toward the old city gate, but this time, being afraid for the child's life every time you saw an official, every time you saw one of the king's soldiers, and then being sent not just to another city, but to a foreign land. Yet, everything is happening in God's direction. Both Mary and Joseph received visits from God's angel. The angel told them both what their lives were to be with each other and what part they would play in bringing the Savior into the world. Then the angel has returned to Joseph saying that in order to protect the child, flee. The writer of Matthew wanted to make sure that we understood that God was in charge, God was directing the scene. God rescued and preserved that other patriarch and savior, Moses, in the same way. When Pharaoh killed all of the Hebrew boys, only Moses was saved. Saved, it turned out, to deliver God's people. God was in charge. This text from which we are reading quotes the Old Testament with God saying, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." The writer of Matthew wrote from the standpoint that for these early Hebrews wondering if Jesus was the promised Messiah, when they heard these words about Egypt, yes, he is. In the tradition of God's previous Savior, Moses, God is controlling the events surrounding Jesus' life. But the refugees, the immigrants, Mary, Joseph, and family had to have feelings and reactions too. Egypt was the place where their ancestors had been slaves. Would they be safe there? No one would look for them there. No one would look for them there. Who would befriend them there? Joseph had to have thought, God, you have assured me in the first dream that this child would be the Savior of the world. Now you are telling this child is making us homeless. This child is making us countryless. This child is making us nationless. God, help me understand this. In 2019, as this year draws to an end, we recall that we've heard about Central American immigrants forced to leave their homeland. Not just because there was no work, but because gangs were violating and enslaving women and children. Over 500,000 Central Americans have been displaced in 2019. 49,000 Salvadorian children have disappeared from school. In Guatemala, over 2 million children have dropped out or disappeared from school. Many of them, like the children in the Moses story and the children in this Matthew story, have been killed. They died as victims of violence, while the one fleeing, like Moses, while the ones fleeing, like the baby Jesus, would be saved. But what of the homeless mothers and fathers then and now, weeping for their slain children? Will there be a 21st century Syrian or Persian or Armenian or Democratic Republic of the Congo or American Savior who, as Matthew has said about Jesus, will make the deaths of all of these mothers and fathers' little children okay? The one who started life as a refugee immigrant, Jesus, never turned anyone away. Anyone. Jesus defined radical kindness and compassion toward travelers, when he told the story of a man who was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. We don't know the cultural identity of this traveler, but two robbers stopped him and beat him and left him for dead. We don't know the cultural or racial identity of the robbers. We know the cultural identity of the priest and the Levite who passed the man. And last night when I gave the sermon, Ben wanted me to make sure that I said they were ritually clean, and if they touched the traveler on the road, they would be ritually unclean and they couldn't go to the temple. We know that. But what we don't know, and perhaps what we don't want to admit, is they were the establishment. The priest and the Levite were us. And we do know the racial and cultural identity of the one who stopped to aid him. His rescuer was one that the establishment, us, hated, would have nothing to do with. He was a traveler, possibly an immigrant, definitely a foreigner. He was a Samaritan. There is no doubt that Jesus wants us to know that the ones we are to hold close to our breasts, our sisters and our brothers, are from anywhere and everywhere. His whole adult life, Jesus was an immigrant. Jesus describes himself in this way: the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Homeless people, immigrants today, like Mary and Joseph in Egypt, want a place to lay their heads. A place where their babies will be safe. A place where their babies are not slain while other babies have to flee. Nowhere in the world is there another nation like the United States of America, whose population consists mostly of immigrants or children of immigrants. It can even be argued that the entire population of the United States is totally composed of immigrants or children of immigrants that came here since the forebears of Native Americans migrated here from Asia. We are all immigrants. Immigrants and their children from the four corners of the globe created this country. Ideas from their native lands, technical knowledge, trade secrets, new arts and philosophies, varieties of cultural ingenuity, music, and all kinds of food are now integrated into American society and culture. All these together with their skills, talents, and work ethic resulted in the creation and emergence of a uniquely great and powerful nation of immigrants. But we children of immigrants are not the same as immigrants who are in danger on the road, are we? Immigrants with no place to lay their heads, no place to keep their children safe. Most of us believe that 21st century immigrants are an example of the God of justice standing with the oppressed. But if we stop there, United Church of Christ pastor Daniel Schultz says, we risk reducing immigrants and the homeless to cardboard cutouts symbolizing our own get-on-with-it agenda. with voices sounding like compassion, oh Lord, help them. We forget about them and thus tie up God's hands considerably. Do you know that mothers and fathers never get over losing a child? Mothers and fathers never get over losing a child. How do they deal with it? They continue to weep and mourn and name their grief. And by faith, we believe that when they are weeping and mourning, God pays attention. God pays attention. Travelers on our own roads, we all suffer and grieve. And we believe God hears those cries. So if we travelers in this space talk about what we have been through and what we have lost, we find other people from all walks of life and from all over the world who are dealing with loss also. And so from this commonality of loss, we began the process of imagining a different world. This commonality of loss and tragedy and sadness and horror. We see a different world. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the Sandy Hook parents whose grief is 7 years old this year, by the way, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School young people and their parents, the Pulse nightclub activists, and all the people traveling through this world talking out loud about their grief, they're all working to recreate the tragedy through which they have gone into something beautiful and meaningful and educational for the world. Schultz says when we bring local grief and suffering, private grief and suffering, horrible grief and suffering into the world community, we create the possibility of real change. And out of this talking and listening and not being so horrified that we shut it out, comes hope that, as the Apostle Paul says, does not disappoint. Matthew was not insensitive to the pain of parents weeping over dead babies, of people displaced trying to find a better life. Matthew wants us to know that even though outrageous horror and mistreatment of other human beings is a huge part of this world, the coming of Christ creates the portal through which we can travel to do something to make this horror and this treatment not just something we have to live with. I am in pain. You are in pain. We are living. The world is in pain. People are fleeing. Babies are dying. What can we do about it? It all begins by whatever our circumstance and whatever we've been through, dreaming about it, praying over it, and then in our common situation of universal loss,